Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to switch between sprites by clicking on an object this way. I'll be covering two different methods in order to achieve that, so let's get started. So the first thing to do is to make sure you have two sprites which you can switch between. In this case I've prepared this happy sprite, this is the first sprite I will display, and the in love sprite. This is the sprite which I will switch to. If you have two sprites, we can continue and add a new node. And in the first method, we'll use the animated sprite 2D. In this method, we have an animation with 2 frames, and each time we'll click on the mouse button, we'll switch between the frames. So it will basically switch between the sprites. So let's add it. And you'll notice there is a warning sign here, it says that we don't have a sprite frames. So let's go ahead and create a new sprite frames. And the sprite frames is what will include our frames. So again, each frame is a separate sprite. So we'll drag first the happy sprite, which will be the first frame, and then we'll add the in love sprite, and this will be the second frame. So the first one is frame number 0, and the second one is frame number 1. And you'll notice the name of the animation is default, but we'll give it a more meaningful name so it will reflect better what we're doing here, which is switching from a happy sprite to in love sprite. And now we can go ahead and create our script. The script will be used in order to actually make the transition. Click on the icon here to add a new script. I will add it in the scripts folder. If you don't have one, you can create it. And I will also call it player to better reflect what the script is about. I will click on create and we have a new empty script. But let's also actually change this animated sprite to be called player. And that's it. We have an empty script. And before we add the code, let's actually see that it works fine. So let's click on play here. Let's click on select current and we'll save our scene, and then we'll see that our player is in the top left corner and we don't actually see it fully. So let's fix it by dragging it to the center of the screen like this and click again on play, and now it looks fine and we can go ahead and add our script. Okay, before we go ahead and write our code, let's describe for a second what is it exactly that we would like to do. And what we would like to do is to check if someone pressed on the left mouse button, and if so, go ahead and change the sprite from the happy sprite to the in love sprite. So to remind you, from the first frame to the second one, because we defined an animation. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll use the built-in function called input. The input function gets an event, and this is how you can check if, for example, a mouse button was clicked. And let's say you didn't know what the input function does exactly. The way to check it is to go ahead and click on lookup symbol, and you can read here that this function is called when there is an input event, which is perfect for what we need because we need to check if the mouse button was clicked. So now that we know what this function does, let's go back to our script, the player script, and let's check if the mouse button was clicked. And because we are interested in the mouse specifically, we'll check if this event was an input event mouse. And we also want to make sure that the button was pressed, so not, for example, scrolling or anything like that. And the last thing to do is to check if the click was specifically using the left mouse button. So we'll do it this way. Now, once we have this conditional, the next thing to do is to simply replace the frame to the next one. And the next frame is 1. Remember, the first frame is 0. And let me just fix here the conditional. And let's run it to check how it works. So let's click on play here. And if I'll click on my mouse, perfect. You can see that it switched to the in love sprite, which is exactly what we wanted. So let's close it now. And right now, the way we implemented it, we can switch to the next frame, but we can actually switch back to the previous frame if we wanted. So to show you how it works, if I'll play here and I'll click, it works, but if I click again, nothing happens. So let's change it. And the change is really simple. We'll just check what is the current frame. So if the current frame is 1, so the second one will switch back to the previous frame. And if it's frame 0, then we'll change it to frame 1. And this is how we can change back and forth. So let's see if it works, and I click again, and perfect. I can switch between the two sprites. Let's summarize quickly how we did the change in this case. We used an animated sprite 2D, and we used the input function in order to check if there was an input event. Once we detected there was an input event of clicking on the left mouse button, we went ahead and changed the frame to be the second frame. So now let me show you a completely different way to achieve the same thing of switching between sprites. And this time we'll use a sprite 2D instead of animated sprite 2D. So let's add a new scene. Again, let's use a sprite 2D, click on create. And the first thing I'll do is to load the happy texture instead of having nothing. So this way, when I'll go to the 2D view, I'll see my character and I can also move it to the middle of the screen the same way I did with the previous one. And now let's go ahead and create a new script and we'll write a logic for this sprite 2D. I'll call it player 2. Let's click on create. And the first thing we want to do is very similar to what we did in the animated sprite 2D. So we want to check if there was a mouse event type. So let's go to the animated sprite 2D and let's copy the relevant part. We don't need to repeat it. We can just copy paste. And the logic here is going to be different. So instead of switching between frames, I'm going to switch between textures. And once someone clicked on the button, I want to switch to the in-left texture, but I don't have it defined right now. So let's define a variable with the in-left texture. And the way we're going to do it is we are simply going to load the texture using the path. So this is how it works. This is the resource path. And let's do a similar thing for the happy texture. And this way I will be able to switch between the two. So let's call it happy texture. And that's it. I can go ahead and run it. But in order to run it, I need to actually switch to this scene. So instead of running the previous one, let's save it. Let's call it, and let's change actually first the sprite 2D. Let's call it player 2. And now I can save the scene, also call it player 2. And now I can configure the project to actually run this scene. So this is how I'm going to do it. Going to application, run, and choosing the new scene. Click on close. Let's play and let's test if it works. And it works. Great. Now we can also do the same thing we did in the previous method where we switched to the previous texture. Let's see how it's done. So let's close it. And very similarly to how it's done in the previous method, we're going to check if current texture is the in-left texture. And if it is, we'll switch to the happy one. Otherwise, we'll set it to the in-left texture. And that's it. I'll save the project, I'll run it, and you can see that I can switch back and forth by clicking on my mouse. That's it. To summarize what we did in this method, we loaded two textures into variables, and then we used logic to switch between the textures based on the current texture. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.